Good morning. We're delighted to welcome you here. Pardon me for my scratchy voice, but I've got the crud that seems to be going around, not the government shutdown, but that other crud. So we're really excited to have you here for what's an incredibly important topic. College and career ready is really a buzzword. It's very, very widely used, and it's easy to understand why. Companies are facing shortages of qualified software designers, tech gurus, engineers, and also highly skilled technicians and operators with the knowledge and savvy to work in advanced manufacturing settings. Research from Change the Equation found that even during the recent Great Recession, job postings for four-year college-educated STEM workers like engineers or computer systems administrators outnumbered unemployed people in those fields by as much as 4-to-1 in some areas. And at the same time, recent research from the Brookings Institution suggests that a full 10% of the U.S. workforce hold STEM jobs that do not require four-year degrees. I want to repeat that. 10% hold STEM jobs that do not require four-year degrees. And these jobs pay substantially more than non-STEM jobs that require the same level of education. Go STEM. So the question that we want to look at today is the extent to which both types of employees need to travel the same K-12 pathway. Should they travel that same pathway? In today's Salon, we will explore whether college and career readiness are the same thing. This is especially critical now as we balance the need to create multiple pathways to career success against very long-standing concerns and a fair amount of data that shows that different education tracks can have unintended negative consequences when we realize that we reinforce unequal opportunities, especially for students of different income and students of different races. So this is really key and critical to what we talk about today. For those of you who are new to our STEM salons, and I'm delighted to see some unfamiliar faces, unless it's just my foggy cold and I don't recognize you, what we do is have a conversation up front and leave plenty of time at the end for Q&A. So please keep in mind that you'll have an opportunity to ask questions. We are videotaping this, so we do ask that you wait for the mic to come to you before posing your question, and our very esteemed panel will do a wonderful job responding. So let me introduce folks as you see them. Immediately here to my left is Kate Blosveren Kreamer, the Associate Executive Director of the National Association of State Directors of Career Technical Education Consortium. That is a mouthful. At the association, Kate leads policy and communications efforts to ensure that all students have access to very high-quality career technical education. Next to Kate is Dr. Amy Loyd, the Executive Director of Pathways to Prosperity, Jobs for the Future, and Harvard University. That's also a long title. Amy supports educators, employers, and government leaders from 9 states in developing, implementing, and scaling sustainable policies, infrastructure, and practice to build STEM career pathways for students that are aligned with projected high-growth employment needs. And last but certainly not least is Rob Vallentine, the Global STEM Director and North America Public Affairs Site Director of a proud member of Change the Equation, the Dow Chemical Company. Rob oversees Dow's STEM education efforts and manages a team that is responsible for public affairs, strategies, and programs at Dow's 60 sites in North America. He also oversees North American contributions from the Dow Chemical Company Foundation. There's additional information about our esteemed panelists on your seats as well. So let me move over there and see if we can start asking some good, insightful, and provocative questions. So let's make sure that we're all using the same vocabulary and starting from the same definition. And I'm wondering if each of the three of you could define excellent career and technical education in just a couple of sentences. I don't care who goes first.
Sure. Well, as the representative with CTE in our title, my organizational title, I'll take a first crack at it, and I imagine we'll get somewhat different definitions that have a lot of overlap. So how I would define, or how my organization would define, career and technical education, it is the fusion of technical and academic experiences that happen at both the secondary and post-secondary level that prepare students for the career of their choice. And the word career is very intentional. This isn't preparation for a job or a specific occupation, but a career, which is a lifelong of learning that requires additional education along the way, and has that core set of skills and academics that is instilled earlier to allow students and adults to continue to be successful in the global economy.
It'll take a minute, or...
There we go. All right. Well, Kate gave us a good framework for it. I will add to it and say that in our work, we see career and technical education as a meaningful way to engage young people hands-on in their learning. So we see it as relevant because it connects kids directly to the world around them and to their future possibilities. We see it as rigorous because we really do believe that CTE and academics are not either or, but both and. We see it as engaging because it's very hands-on. I mean, ultimately, it's good pedagogy to not just have acquisition of knowledge, but application of knowledge to apply what you're learning into doing. And we see it as adaptable. I mean, our young people in STEM courses are learning skills that are flexible across an array of career possibilities. And so ultimately, we love working in the CTE realm because we are building partnerships and relationships across stakeholder groups, working with employers, working with schools, working with families and students to create possibilities for our young people to fulfill their endless potential in an array of career-focused learning opportunities.
Great, thanks. From a Dow Chemical standpoint, we believe we need to all work together, that's business, government, and industry, to demonstrate that there are multiple career pathways through high school and post-secondary with a goal of building a skilled, adaptable, creative, and equipped workforce. So what does that mean? I kind of shortened it to say that we need students that are educated, skilled, and know what they want to do.
So how will we recognize success? If we've got a basic definition, when will we know to raise our glass of champagne and toast ourselves? Anybody, any order, any disagree or agree with one another, whatever works best.
Well, we were talking, and many of you saw us talking as you entered the room today, we were talking about some of the conversations we've had in the field lately. And even from our leading educators, I often hear, we really believe in CTE, we're eager to build out these career pathways, how wonderful that basically other people's children will have this opportunity. So I see the ultimate metric of success when all families, students, educators view CTE as a rigorous, meaningful pathway to a successful future and don't see it as a lesser than pathway with stigma attached.
I had a conversation yesterday with a gentleman that runs a large manufacturing facility in my hometown. He talked about the fact that his son had said that he wanted to go to the career technical high school. And he, as a father, thought, uh-oh, something is wrong. Exactly. And that is what I think we're trying to change. And when that attitude is no longer there, I think we'll have achieved success, where somebody can say, I can embrace. And he didn't even realize at the time that this particular high school sent over half on to college, and the other half went on to incredibly very good skilled trades jobs.
And the thing I'd add to that, to sort of put the student at the center, is I think you have success when students are able to, or you're able to start with what is their career pathway, right? What is the career that they want the end of their journey, and then working backwards from there, right? So really then thinking about what are the academic courses, what are the technical CT courses, what are the out-of-school experiences I need to have, what are the credentials I need, and really build a plan based on that pathway versus what we have now is we put them through K-12, they go to college, and then they have to figure out what they're doing with very mixed success, which again leads to a skill. I mean, I think the other side of that from the employer perspective is that you actually have people in those middle skill jobs prepared for them, and the skills gap disappears.
So I'm not sure what I'm going to be when I grow up yet. Still working on that one. But I'm wondering, in terms of your definition of success, when you look at youth, especially in the K-12 sequence, which at least is our current focus, how do you think about that definition of success, just in terms of the maturity level of youth in thinking about who they are and what it is that they might want to be? How do you sort of actualize the way you define success?
Well, I think, first of all, I mean, we need more career guidance, and not starting in junior year. Typically, students cannot really access career and technical education until their junior year, in part because they have to get through all the academics first, they have to jump through a lot of hoops, and then they can access that. So one is moving CT opportunities, the integration, the career exploration opportunities into the middle school. And I want to make an important point or come back to a point that this is not saying you are on this path, you cannot get off this path. It is giving students an opportunity to do that exploration while they're in high school. There are many students that do CTE, that do a really rigorous CT pathway in high school, and then realize, I don't want to do this, and go to college for something else. And I think we'd be in a much better place, and a lot of students would be in a much better place if they ruled things out while they were in high school versus having to wait to get to college to realize that this is actually not the career for me. So that's part of it. I think just the exposure, bringing in employers, doing more work-based learning, having them get to test out and learn about industries and really understand it's not all about the four-year degree, but what are the different options available.
And I think that's an excellent response, Kate, but I would add to that, opening up exposure to teachers as well, to what industry occupations are currently available, what are projected. Often our students learn about careers from their teachers in their classrooms, and many of our teachers, as we know, come from being students themselves to becoming teachers and don't necessarily have the direct industry experience that they need to counsel students in the jobs of today and the careers of tomorrow. And so opening up exposure for students and their families, so starting career counseling in middle school, if not younger, and ensuring that our educators, who are often the primary point of contact to our students, also have the opportunity, whether through teacher externships or through other industry collaborations, to learn about possibilities for young people. There are so many career possibilities out there that our kids just don't know about, and there's tremendous opportunity in them.
One of the things that we really try to push at all of our manufacturing sites is to engage our employees out in the schools and out in the community. And this can be our existing employees, this can also be retirees. We know, especially with the younger generation, it seems they aren't asking, can I volunteer? They're asking, where do I volunteer? So there is a great opportunity for us to engage our employees out with the schools, and again, with extra programs after school where they can learn what we all do each and every day in industry, and I think that's really important. I haven't figured out exactly how to do that comprehensively, but we do have employees that are saying, hey, I want to give back, and the schools are a great way to be able to do that.
And on that note, in the October edition of the American Education Research Journal, there's a great article about STEM majors and why young people go on to choose STEM majors, and often it comes back to exposure in, well, it's kind of an obvious thing, in high school and in middle grades, and exposure often isn't enough. Students need to experience success, so to work directly with industry is a great thing, and also to build that sense of agency or self-efficacy, excuse me, believing that they can be successful. So it's an equity issue in ensuring that all young people have opportunities to engage in such learning endeavors.
And you know, I often think about, I think the STEM movement and the STEM reforms and all the programs as a real opportunity to bring these exposures and these experiences to earlier grades. I think STEM, which, as I'll keep coming back to this point that STEM and CT are one and the same, and we really need to make that connection in the policy community as well as on the ground, that it's not an either or. If you look at STEM, they're almost all CT programs. They're technical, they're problem-based learning, they're anchored in career. But a lot of those programs are starting in middle school or starting in elementary school. There sort of is this movement from the STEM. There's a recognition that you need to start earlier. High school is too late. So there's a real opportunity to build on that as a platform to do some of that career exploration and exposure in earlier grades.
So the U.S. has a pretty sorry history of having separate and unequal educational opportunities. And one might surmise that the whole phrase college and career ready is to be a strong effort not to fall into that pit again, not to ensure that it's separate and unequal in terms of potential. So I guess the question, and you've begun to address this, but let me push a little more. Do you see that CTE curriculum, starting in elementary school all the way through high school, is really preparing those students who might be interested for a rigorous 4-year degree program?
It absolutely can be. I mean, look, it's important to say that not all CT is built the same, obviously. There are excellent programs. There are non-excellent programs. I think something to really look at is what's really focused on, again, that career, coming back to what is really anchored in the career path versus the life skills or, very terminal focused. I think the field is moving. So I want to make that point to say that, obviously, there's high quality CT and then there's not as high quality CT. And I think there's a lot more that can be done to focusing on the return on investment and really ensuring that we're investing in those programs that really are the best interest of students and our economy. So putting that on the table, I think it's important. So now going back to high quality CT, absolutely that compare students to 4-year degrees. The notion of college readiness and where that's been so far has been the academic side, right? That has how it's been defined a little narrowly, but that's been a win. That's been a victory. I think there's a lot of agreement that there is an academic foundation that all individuals need, but I think it's now time to look at what are some of the technical skills and a broader definition, more comprehensive, prepare students for whatever they want to do after high school.
Excuse me. The Pathways to Prosperity report, which was released in 2011, highly recommend reading it if you haven't. It's a quick and very engaging read. Basically shone a light on something that, if you've worked in education, you know firsthand, which is that too many of our young people aren't going on to college. And frankly, the U.S. leads the world in post-secondary dropout rates, the developed world, according to the OECD, where only about 60% of our young people who go on to 4 years complete. Only about 30% of our young people who go on to 2-year colleges complete. And so what are we doing to better prepare our young people to make post-secondary decisions is a question that we're thinking about. And we're putting our heads in the sand if we think 4-year college for all is the answer. I mean, for the past 20 years, the data's held pretty steady that around 30% of our 25-year-olds have a 4-year degree or higher. Another 10% might have an associate's degree or higher. Another 10% might have an industry credential or certificate. But that leaves 50% of 25-year-olds in our country without any post-secondary education. And so we believe that all young people need some form of post-secondary education, but that's not necessarily a 4-year degree. Nonetheless, we don't want to close doors of opportunity to any young child. We want children and their families to make their own decisions, to practice self-determination. Schools should not be deciding who's going to college, who's college material, and who isn't. Kids should be deciding this in partnership with their parents. And so as a result, we see this critical bridging from high school through community college is a key piece to revitalizing our economies and engaging young people in careers, but we also see it as a potential stepping stone to further education down the road. I mean, learning is a lifelong endeavor. We're having to learn new things in our careers. Young people are increasingly shifting careers, so we see education as something that we want to always have as a possibility. That said, it doesn't have to be 4-year college for all.
One of the ways that we frame what's going on right now is you look at the fact that we have uninterested students looking at STEM careers, and we have unprepared students. So when you take the uninterested plus the unprepared, you get this unrealized opportunity that's out there. So depending, it doesn't matter whether someone's going to choose skilled trades or someone's going to go on to, to get a PhD. I think the important thing is that number one, we need to get them interested in the kinds of careers that are out there today. we need to make sure that they're prepared. So again, whether it's skilled or whether it's PhD, are they prepared in math? Are they prepared in science? And I think what I keep seeing more and more is that we have just some of the basics that aren't happening today that we really need to focus on in the next several years.
So I'm taking notes because they're saying so many things I want to follow up on. I promise I'll give you a chance, but at the moment I still have the floor. So we've heard that parents need to encourage their kids to think about this. We've heard that teachers need to better understand the potential and promise. We've heard that guidance counselors, and I'm sure school administrators, in other words, everyone, all the adults in a young person's life ought to be encouraging young people to consider these options. But how do you figure that out? I mean, how do you decide sort of who you might give that encouragement to and who you might give a different kind of encouragement? Because we are trying to get equally rigorous, but perhaps somewhat different pathways toward graduation. And maybe, Amy, you could even talk a little bit about your 9 sites, what they might be doing. But that's sort of a general question. How do you figure out what you say to whom?
That's a good question. So in the Pathways to Prosperity Network, we're working across this network of states who have selected within those states specific regions in which to build out career pathways that are linked to local labor market needs. And the 3 industry sectors that rise to the top in most of our regions are advanced manufacturing, IT, and healthcare careers. Nonetheless, there are many other clusters that surface as well: transportation, distribution, logistics, finance, energy. But those 3 are the core that we're starting with in building out grades 9 through 14 career pathways. How these take place varies from state to state and region to region. Sometimes they're in comprehensive high schools, sometimes they're in career academies. They partner with community colleges by and large, but sometimes there's a 4-year college in there. But ultimately, what we're wanting to do is create starting places within states that then can be scaled and expanded to statewide systems of career pathways for all young people to avail themselves of. We recognize that not all young people will enter a career pathway. We want to confront the tracking challenge head on. Like, this isn't putting young people in a narrowing pathway, but rather giving them hands-on experience and engaging learning that can open up possibilities for them. And as Kate was saying, like, often young people go through CTEq courses of study and then recognize that, oh, well, maybe I don't like blood and healthcare careers aren't for me, but now I have all this great, you might call it social emotional learning or 21st century skills or foundational metacognitive skills that I can apply to any industry sector, and I have some great stuff on my resume. So we're building these basically pilot sites that we hope to expand, have statewide systems of 9 through 14 career pathways. And we don't see it as just for a certain segment, just for this segment of students. We see it as a really viable, engaging, meaningful opportunity for all students. And I'd point to California and the Linked Learning Initiative, where they have wall-to-wall career pathways in certain districts, like Long Beach, for example, where all students are engaged in career-based learning, integrated alongside their academic learning. And so it's not just a sub-segment, but something that, ultimately all of our young people go on to careers. So all young people need this experience.
And, I'd say when really good programs are built, really good CT programs, really good schools, really good academies, and you build them, students will go to them. They will flock to them, right? So you look at Massachusetts and New Jersey, which are New England is not known for having really embraced career technical education as much as some other states like California, but their vocational high schools have the longest waiting lists. You have kids banging on the door to get to them and parents encouraging them because those kids are graduating, they're going on to college, they're entering careers successfully. So if you build it, they will come, I think is a way of sort of saying that. And I think the academy model and looking at really comprehensive programs that aren't, again, focused on this job, but let's actually build out and explaining what those opportunities are to students. I think you have to start to some extent with the student. I think you have to spark their interest, and they need to demand this from their parents. Because I think we have a real, whether it's a communications, whether it's a culture challenge, that CT is for those kids. And I think we need to change that because CT can and should be for all kids.
One of the ways that we look at our overall STEM strategy is in what we call four educational pillars, and they are teach, learn, work, and advocate. And it really is a pretty simple way, but a pretty robust way of looking at where we're going to spend our time and where we're going to spend our energy as a company. So obviously on the teach side is we're going to go out and really try to partner on a national level and then on a local level of how can we support teacher development. How do we support them? That could be through programs like we have with the National Science Teachers Association, programs that we have with the Smithsonian. Again, helping teachers, become to be more relevant and to understand more about what we're also doing as a company. That's on the teach side. The learn side is really where we reach out to students. We do that through programs. We have a program called You Be the Chemist, very similar to a spelling bee, but it's about how do you get excited about chemistry that not only reaches the kids, but it reaches the parents and it reaches teachers as well. So we are trying to, in each of those categories, whether it's teach, learn. On the work side is about career pathways. We recently had a local event where we went into the school and talked to teachers during one of their professional development days. We spent time helping them understand what our employees do, and it wasn't from my perspective as the director of STEM education, but from our employees. We had the employees that came in and talked to the teachers. So that's on the work side. How do we prepare people for work? And then on the advocate side is really what we do here with Change the Equation, what we do with other organizations is how do we work together? Because I think before we would have as a company went out and maybe developed a program on our own, and we're realizing that we are much better as we join together with other people, and we can do a lot more together than we can separately.
And one other point, it's sort of
Sure, no,
answering
no.
a different question, but the teachers and what you were saying about sort of the teacher piece, I think another critical component to all of this is identifying opportunities and strategies for bringing core academic teachers together with CT teachers through professional development, both pre-service, in-service, to actually understand what they're doing and where those points of contact are. They are completely siloed, and they rarely are going to take that step to really work together. The space needs to be created for them, but once they understand how much overlap is, how much they can be connecting what they're doing, that they will pay that forward to students. And then as students build those connections, it all is just reinforcing.
So one of the points that you've all made is there are high-quality CTE learning experiences, and then I'll just let my voice trail off. How does one recognize a high-quality program, and how does one help a less than high-quality program step up its game?
Well, there's a lot of discussion out there about really around the return on investment, and there are some states that are doing this. Washington has really been able to identify the return on investment for their programs and which are stronger, which are less strong, and really focusing on not just the academic, the number of indicators they're having to report up for federal, which are very much focused on, attainment of credentials and graduation, achievement both in academics and technical, but also looking at what are students doing when they leave high school or leave the post-secondary space, and really bringing in that employment information down. I think that's where this is all going, or where it needs to go, and as states build stronger data systems, I think we'll see this more and more, and really focusing on what is the labor market demanding, where are the jobs, and making sure that your programs is responsive to that environment.
Change is hard. I mean, any system change is hard, but in education in particular, which is my background, it's often easy to add new programs, but to cut existing programs is a very painful process. And so often any course, whether it's CTE or other, is determined by the faculty they have on hand, what they know how to teach, and what has come before. So to take a really hard critical look at what are the real jobs that we're needing to prepare young people for, what sorts of skills and abilities do we want our young people to have, and are we truly meeting those, often is best facilitated through looking at external data. So taking a look at what do students do when they complete our coursework and go on to post-secondary or go on to the workforce, how successful are they, and that depersonalizes it. But nonetheless, schools and states, in increasing kind of budget constraints, are now having to think more critically about how to reallocate funds to best serve students' needs. And it's a really hard process.
I asked a principal recently how she views success, and she said obviously there's lots of data around how kids are performing, but she said one of the soft ways that they look at success is let's give as an example, she says a welder. She said, so if a kid wants to become a welder, does he feel that is a successful career for him or her to become a welder? That's one option. Another option is that I want to be a welder, and I want to also get my associate's degree. So I think that's important, that I can go do other career things besides being a welder. I'm a welder with additional education. Could I go on, because I enjoy welding, and go on to be an engineer? Do I see that as a pathway? And beyond an engineer, do I see myself moving into business and potentially becoming we have many engineers in our company that have become business managers and executives in our company. So her success was, do the kids, do the parents, and do the teachers see all of those different pathways as success?
And ultimately, I think Common Core state standards and next generation standards help us in this movement towards rigor, or increasing and enhancing rigor, just because they are more focused on application of knowledge. They do incorporate more opportunities to integrate CTE in academics and do some integrated lesson planning across silos and disciplines. And so we see that as an entree into having those conversations within the CTE community about how we can ensure that we're improving our expectations for ourselves, for our students, for all the teaching and learning that takes place.
So Amy read my mind. That actually was my next question on Common Core and Next Gen. So let me push and probe a little more on that. It's a la Rodney Dangerfield, we don't get no respect in the CTE world. So I'm wondering, at the moment, Common Core and Next Gen are just articulations of what folks hope to have happen, and the development of curriculum, other than all those publishers who are slapping a new label consistent with Common Core, they print those out by the millions. I'm wondering what the CTE community is planning to do or can do to ensure that the rollout is really more consistent with what you envision. How is it that you can demand respect?
Well, so CTE, the challenge is they are not invited to the table. So I think it is fantastic that the literacy standards are there for technical subjects. I think CTE teachers are really interested in Common Core, want to know what to do with it. But if you look at, for all the materials out there that have Common Core aligned, right, slapped on it, try to find some that are for CT educators, and you will not find them. There is a dearth of supports, of materials, instructional materials, of rubrics that are designed for CT teachers to really build in this literacy as represent the Common Core. So I think there's a real need, there's a real gap, and so a real need, because they are doing a lot of this literacy, right? They are having students read the traditional technical manuals, but also doing research and writing up reports. But they don't necessarily have the skills to give the feedback that students need, or to grade it in the right way. And so that's a real opportunity to bring, right, the ELA and the CT teachers together. So it's a good opportunity. Some states are ahead of the game. I think New Jersey's doing a good job. I think Oregon is doing a good job. But it has not been baked in the cake, in part because I think states figured, we have the short window, we need to focus on math and English teachers, we'll get to the other teachers later, but they're running out of time. And so the CT community has stepped up. I mean, this past year, every state has CT conferences, their PD conferences, and Common Core was on every single, nearly every single state agenda. They're very interested in it. They want support, but it's a gap. I mean, we're partnering with a couple of organizations to actually tackle this and try to build some materials and really get a sense of what do they need and what are the materials in PD that we can develop. So we're working with a coalition of some organizations to start to fill that gap. I think with Next Gen Science, they just don't know about it yet because, again, they haven't largely been brought into that conversation. I think the communication around that needs to be, the engineering is, really understanding what that practice means, but bringing them in that because they can really translate how those practices look in the classroom, because that is the type of work that they're doing.
Yeah, I also see opportunity as we're moving increasingly towards kind of challenging what education looks like, the brick and mortar of schools. We're recognizing that students learn in many places inside and outside of the classroom, so anytime, anywhere, student-centered learning is coming to the forefront, which often pushes against Carnegie units or seat time. And so if we're continuing to move in this direction, which I believe we will have to for a number of reasons, and start transitioning to more proficiency-based teaching and learning, there's an opportunity that states are now availing themselves of to integrate CTE into part of this so that students can demonstrate core academic competencies through their CTE classes and get academic credit for doing so. It's, again, these system changes are difficult, and ultimately the rubber meets the road in the classroom. And so it's great to have all these great policies and wonderful textbooks, but ultimately, do our teachers and students know how to engage in the standards in meaningful ways? That's going to take a lot of work on the ground to make sure that the promise of Common Core standards is fulfilled and really engaging excellent education for all kids.
Yeah, I think the competency-based work could be transformative, and the Common Core really allows it to happen. But I think, and CT can be the delivery, right, of these standards, of these proficiencies. But I think states need to be very careful as they're designing the competency framework that CT is involved at the beginning. It's really baked in the cake. It's not, we'll figure out competency and then we'll bring CT in later because then they can help deliver it. Versus CT is going to be our core delivery system. And I think we're going to see it play out differently in different states.
So if you're not automatically invited to the table, how can you get a seat at that table at the right time? I've spent my career asking myself that.
Right. We just tell them just to show up, right? If there's that meeting, just don't wait to be invited. Invite yourself. But
in our network, our point of entry is at the state level because we see state leadership and state policy being the important infrastructure for implementation of career pathways on the ground. And at the state level, it varies from state to state what that door is that we're entering through. In some states, like Illinois, it was their Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity. In Massachusetts, it's 3 secretariats. We've got Education, Labor and Workforce, and Economic Development. So states at a state level are seeing the real need to link education with workforce development, with economic development. It's if you take a step back, it makes perfect sense. So in that case, we're able to really encourage CTE to play a leading role in shaping what education transformation could look like through the development of career pathways. So we're starting with the big picture of linking those 3 areas together and then drilling down to making sure that CTE is at the driver's seat.
I think they answered it well.
So at a previous job, I was part of the research for the American Diploma Project, which was really the precursor, and from that project, I think it's fair to say, came the term college and career ready. The genesis of it might be argued, but it was sort of in that basis. So it's a little early for a soap opera on TV, and I'm giving you this as an example, partly in humor, but partly in reality. So in trying to figure out what the workplace needed in terms of skills, particularly for a living wage job that did not necessarily require a 4-year degree, could be a 2-year degree, it could be a certificate or a series of certificates, we tried to show employers lists of, in this case, mathematical knowledge in the language of education, not in the language of the business community. And again, this is a piece of fiction, but I hope it makes the point. So you could imagine an HR person looking at a long list of mathematics skills and saying something like, Pythagorean theorem. I remember the Pythagorean theorem. Everybody needs the Pythagorean theorem. So, I'm wondering how you all are doing that crosswalk between the language of the workforce and the language of education, particularly in light of Common Core and Next Gen. That's a tough question, I know.
Well, we have 4 key implementation levers in developing out our grades 9 through 14 career pathways, one of which is the role of intermediaries and engaging intermediaries to be that glue between employers and educators to make sure that the translation takes place, because the world of business moves in such a different speed with such different priorities than the world of education. And often, having to bring different people from different stakeholder groups together to set common goals is an important and lengthy process, but certainly can be done. And I was with the Boston PIC, the Private Industry Council in Boston is our local intermediary in the Boston region. I was with their executive director last week, and he said, intermediaries between educators and employers are like the glue in a chair. You don't realize that it's there until it's not there. And then you sit down and you realize that, we really do need whether it's a nonprofit organization or chambers of commerce sometimes play this role. Sometimes schools themselves have entities within them playing this role. But somebody responsible for planning, for convening, for connecting educators and employers, setting common goals, common metrics, so that we can really build collaborative relationships to together shape young people's educational prospects and their future career prospects. So it's a process of bringing together multiple stakeholders from education, from employment, from local government, from community-based organizations to start kind of having these collective conversations around how we can collectively support education for young people.
One of the examples that I'd like to share is that we saw a need several years ago in the Michigan area for skilled trades, and we needed highly trained people for chemical process jobs. We decided we can do some training of our own, of new people coming in, or we can go out and partner with somebody else in the industry. And we went out and partnered with our junior college. It's called Delta College, locally in the Great Lakes Bay region in Michigan. And together, we put together a program that brings in folks to be trained in a 16-week period where they are now coming out of that program and ready to come into chemical processing jobs. Chemical processor jobs. We also have training with lithium-ion battery manufacturing, solar manufacturing, and now business process services through this junior college. So this is something that came out of a partnership of us as a company coming forward and saying, hey, we need help in this area. Can you help us do this? We've also expanded this into we know that the model doesn't always work the same everywhere you go. And so we have a program down in Texas and also one in Louisiana. So we look for what the needs are in that local community, and then we try to partner with other folks as we know that we can't do that by ourselves. So I think that's a great example of working with junior college, working with that, kind of post secondary. And I think the other thing that we've seen recently is, especially in the state of Michigan, with folks needing to be retrained coming out of the automotive industry, is that this program has been very, very effective in bringing people in, helping them become retrained and then qualified to come work in our manufacturing facilities.
And the issue of the vocabulary is a huge one. I think the education of business in so many different ways just speak a different language, but that is often reflected within schools between the academic and the CT teachers. They're speaking a different vocabulary, and so the Pythagorean theorem, class example, 3, 4, 5 triangle in geometry. I've been with CT teachers, and we have them looking at algebra, and they say, I would never ask my students to do it this way. I'd have them do this shortcut, and they have shortcuts to a lot of the math. And so part of it is, as I said before, and it sounds oversimplified, but it has one of the greatest impact is building that space for the academic and CT teachers to come together and explain and understand each other's vocabulary and make those connections and break down sort of that glossary of how they look at a problem and their approach, and how a math teacher, I think, is the most classic, the math and the CT, and just having them understand that what if we ask students to solve it both ways?
Increasingly, high school diplomas and even college diplomas, 2- and 4-year, don't necessarily translate to actionable skills in the workforce. So employers are saying, I don't know it. So I personally have a 4-year degree in philosophy. Like, what does that mean that I can do? I left my philosophy program and went to a community college and got my EMT certification so that I had skills. So I think focusing, I have lots of critical thinking skills. Don't get me wrong. I've completed the philosophy degree with great joy and have a lot of love for the liberal arts. And so that's why, for me, it really is a both-and issue. Gosh, that was such a slam. I did not mean that. But ultimately, what we've done is, Rob just made me think, worked with communities, starting with the post-secondary credential that we're looking for students to potentially complete, backwards mapping from there what pathway they would need to most efficiently and effectively integrate college and high school, so some dual enrollment options in the high school level, into the post-secondary, into the workforce. So we start with post-secondary, backwards map, and then forwards map to employers, and look at, of course, the academic pathways, integrated with the CTE pathways. And the more we say academic versus CTE, the more we're differentiating them. So I want to make sure that we really see it as a coherent learning whole. But on top of that, what we hear from employers when we're meeting with employers in the field is we hire for hard skills, we fire for soft skills. It's those employability skills and metacognitive skills that often don't get owned by any teacher or any classroom. So we're working with employers to sit around a table, look at programs of study, courses, course designs, scope and sequence, and then how we're embedding the employability skills into each of those courses so that all teachers, CTE and academic, see their role and responsibility in helping prepare young people to be critical thinkers, critical consumers of information, creative problem solvers, all the things that all of our employers want our young people to be, because ultimately that often is what makes or breaks a young person's employment prospects.
So here's my last question before turning it over to you. I particularly appreciated Rob's comment of participating as part of a coalition in terms of advocacy and being one voice in a chorus in supporting a certain idea. So of great interest generally, and particularly to the corporate community, is what are high school graduation requirements? And the phrase that Amy just used, which I'm going to steal repeatedly, about what you hire and what you fire for. That's a great description. What I'm wondering is, how does the movement towards higher expectations for high school graduation influence what's going on in career and technical education? And is the move particularly for more years of mathematics and more years of science? What is the fallout or impact of that on CTE?
So the question behind that question is Algebra 2. And that's been a hot topic for many districts and states, especially as states are looking at their graduation requirements, and some states are cutting back, like Texas just reduced what they called the 4x4, which created waves in the education world. Other states are bolstering and reinforcing their education graduation course requirements at the same time. And so the question that's been put on the table again and again is, do all students need Algebra 2 to graduate from high school? And I don't know that I have a clear answer to that, except I know that, and we're trying to take a carefully neutral stance, I believe that there are other forms of mathematics, that all students should continue to learn in mathematics. I was a former high school teacher. But mathematical modeling, so applying mathematics to real-world situations, or statistics and probability, may be more hands-on, engaging ways and relevant to careers to learn math than Algebra 2 or the calculus pathway. That said, it goes back to self-determination and not closing off opportunities. So if you are to no longer require Algebra 2 for all students, don't just leave a void there. Have something very meaningful, very rigorous, very tied to students' careers in place so that young people can continue to learn math in more relevant ways to their futures.
So Algebra 2, I spent 7 years of my life defending Algebra 2. Yeah, I mean, I strongly, support the Common Core. My organization strongly supports the Common Core, and the Common Core is through Algebra 2. And I think that needs to be on the table. I know you've done research that states are not recognizing that that's Algebra 2, and there's going to be a real wake-up call when the tests come online and students are either not able to take the test because they're not enrolled in Algebra 2, or they're not able to pass the test because they haven't had that content, depending on whether you're Park or Smart or Balance. I do think that there is a common foundation in the academics that all students need, and I think the Common Core is it. That's where the consensus is. Maybe the next version will shake something loose and recognize that there are some concepts that fall down and are not for all. But I think it's about keeping all doors open, keeping all options open. I think it's recognizing that many of these technical jobs require way more than Algebra 2, and going into HVAC or going into IT, requires more mathematics than getting a philosophy degree at a four-year college. And so it's really about giving students the foundation that gives them the options to move around. And I think the other piece of this is we think about, as people are career changers, as they're coming back for being retrained, having that foundation set in high school versus saying, you don't need this because you're going on this path. If they then want to change their career later, they want to go back and get retrained, if they've never had it, that they're at a huge deficit, and it's much harder to make it up later. I do, think that Post the sort of Common Core, there needs to be a broader range of options in math and doing the integration. It doesn't need to be the pre-calc and calculus. I think modeling, absolutely. I think there's a way to repackage some of the earlier math content that's in the earlier grades, but doing it not necessarily rigorous in terms of this is calculus, but rigorous in terms of the application, and really giving students an opportunity to take those additional courses aligned to their post-high school plans. I do think competency-based, again, to come back to that, that's a great opportunity to really think about what are different ways to deliver this, what are different ways for students to master it outside of a traditional classroom, which is often a barrier for students, right? I mean, I think it's not the content of the Algebra 2 that's the barrier. I think it's the delivery system of the Algebra 2 that's the barrier. And so hopefully we can move to the next conversation.
Although Common Core does have two ways of mapping out math. So they have the pathway through Algebra 2, and then they have the integrated math sequence, which is a little more, that's still open to interpretation in places. And theoretically, yes, I mean, all the standards in Common Core, nobody would point to any of the standards and say students should not learn this. And I think we are all on board recognizing that Common Core is the foundation for student learning into the future.
Just a quick comment. I think we just need to make sure that the standards don't stop kids from going on. So I look back at my own education, and I took Accounting 1 and thought I was going to be an accounting major, and took Accounting 2 and decided accounting was not for me. Now, was that because I didn't have a good teacher, or was it because that wasn't right for me, but it just stopped me? I'll say I did the same thing with computer science. I took computer science 1, did great, got an A, took computer science 2, and decided computer science was not for me. I also spent 7 years on advanced algebra. That was trying to complete it, but anyway, that was a little, just kidding. This is being taped, isn't it? I actually did pass it, but I think we need to make sure that there aren't things that stop kids from continuing to learn, because we need kids to graduate from high school, and we need them to be able to go on to post-secondary. If they want to go on for 1 year or go on for 2 years, and we just don't want to stop. I mean, we have some incredible opportunities on the whole advanced manufacturing side for skilled trades jobs, great high-demand jobs, and we need to make sure we're looking at things like, are they adaptable? Are kids creative? Can they make decisions independently? It's all the soft skills. It's critical thinking skills, ability to work in teams. Those are the things that we need to make sure. Sometimes I think we let the standards get in the way and may stop us from getting to the other side.
But I do want to put a point on the soft skills, because I think it's dangerous to talk about soft skills over here and then the academic and technical skills here. Because critical thinking, I mean, how are you going to learn that, right? I mean, you still are learning that through your academic, your CT, those experiences. I mean, students should be, right? It's not as if you're going to have, here's our critical thinking class, now I'm going to go to my math class, now I'm going to go to my engineering class. So, and I think the Common Core does a good job of laying some of those critical skills in. Obviously, it comes down to the pedagogy and making sure teachers, are understanding how to do project-based and problem-based learning and teaching, and coming up with those activities for students that really tap into those skills. And then, pushing back on kids when you're not seeing them. So I just want to put that.
So as you can see, we've assembled incredible expertise and passion about this topic, and it is your turn to ask questions. We will have a roving mic. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. And
so I'm going to start in the back. Hi, the House started hearings.
introduce yourself, please.
I'm sorry, Ned McCulloch with IBM. The House started hearings on Perkins a couple weeks ago, and one of the discussions was about better aligning some of the Perkins programs with the needs of the employers that are out there, and wondered if you had any comment on that.
That's the starting place for all of our conversations in the Pathways to Prosperity Network, is we look at both BLS data, but also real-time labor market information that really, is the best information that we can suss out, that helps us think through what true employer needs are, not just in terms of what openings they have, but there are some software programs. We use Burning Glass that breaks down what skills employers are looking for, what credentials and certifications they need, and try to do a real kind of big picture analysis of how to best then map back into education. And clearly Perkins, as well as ESEA, need to think about the funding structures and incentives in place to make sure that our education systems really are meeting the needs of our kids and our communities. So yes, absolutely.
I mean, I agree. I mean, I spoke earlier about, bringing in the labor market data and thinking about the broader set of Perkins reporting indicators. I think that's a great place, right? I mean, they will, what is required to be measured is what's ultimately ends up mattering, and we know that. And so I think that's where the conversations are going, and that's certainly my organization and our priorities around Perkins are, very clear on building in that labor market data and really having that be a much bigger part of the conversation.
And some states are using their Perkins Reserve Fund in really creative ways, and I would like to see that sort of better explored and supported as well, to better link the employer-educator connection.
I'm Susan Sclafani, formerly worked in CTE at the Department of Ed, and I know that one of the major challenges, and I was delighted to hear Rob talk about the Delta College, Community College project, but one of the challenges is how do we afford to put the kind of equipment needed to prepare young people for CTE into schools? New Jersey did it by creating vocational centers, but that left out really the non-college going kids. And that's a major problem for the rest of the high schools in the state is what do we do with these kids? We have neither the equipment nor the talent to teach them. And community colleges are a great place to put expensive equipment, but then how do we get the high school kids over there so that they can take advantage of this? Because high schools would love to do more, but they don't have the equipment, and I know from Houston as well as from the department that employers say it's better not to train them at all than train them on obsolete equipment.
I think I'm thinking of a local high school that started a program called a New Tech High School, and very project-based learning. And what they did is creatively decided they can only take so much out of their own budget. They then went out and did fundraising from local foundations, from local companies, and together the community pulled together to do a pilot at this local high school where everyone will end up going through this program after 4 years. But they went out and sought private funding, and they got the support. I'm not saying that's always available in all communities, but I think the ways of funding needs to be looked at differently.
It is a huge capital investment, particularly in kind of precision manufacturing and other highly technical equipment needed for student learning. And that's one role that intermediaries can play. I think about Illinois, they have these new statewide STEM learning exchanges so that are industry-led, and one of the roles of the learning exchanges by sector is to identify where these capital investments have been made and find ways to connect the whole region to be able to engage in learning at that site. And so it takes transportation's often a huge barrier for schools. It takes some creative funding and reallocation, but why invest in all this equipment if someone down the road at the community college already has it? So what are the ways that we can create memorandums of understanding or shared agreements in which we can share our equipment and our resources? We have to be smarter about that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's really partnerships is going to be the key to the equipment, and I think that's partnerships between schools. And so you see certainly in South Dakota some rural communities that are coming together and saying, you're going to have this equipment, you'll have this, and we'll sort of come up with a way of distributing our students. I mean, transportation is a huge barrier. I mean, you're talking about any of these, but partnerships between schools, between community colleges, and you're seeing community colleges now sort of put academies on their campuses, as well as between business, and that's a huge one. I mean, a good example of the business is Skills USA, which is a career technical student organization that sets up competitions for students. And if you guys are not familiar with it, look into it. It's fantastic. And if you want confidence in students that have the hard and the soft skills, these kids have it. And they have a huge competition regionally in states, and then a national one. And the competitions are designed by business, and all the equipment is donated by business. And you are seeing, I mean, you have convention center filled with equipment that then is all donated at the end of it. And so I think business is stepping up, or some business are stepping up, and we can't put it all on them. But, in the age of fewer and fewer resources and having states and localities make decisions between buying that equipment and bringing on new teachers, we don't want to have to force that decision. And I think they should be focusing on the core and figuring out how to bring in some of the equipment through partnerships.
Another question.
Hi, Michael Burke, After School Alliance, and a fellow liberal arts major. In terms of overcoming resistance and barriers, systemic resistance and barriers to establishing CT as a core delivery system, have you found surprising resistance from areas that you thought were predisposed to be allies? And conversely, have you found allies in areas that you thought may have been predisposed to be resistant? Feel free to name names.
Well, I think about an ally. State education agencies are up against a lot of constraints and typically have been compliance-oriented and focused on the bureaucracy of keeping schools going. They're now increasingly in a role of being capacity builders of schools and thinking innovatively and leading change, and it's a big shift sort of philosophically for SEAs to take on. And two of the states in our network, Missouri and Tennessee in particular, have at the state level combined their academic and their career and technical education into kind of one department, which is generally atypical. And so they have one person responsible for both, and seeing that responsibility as key to go hand in hand. So, whether you're looking at Missouri or Tennessee, both states are now creating positions on the ground that integrate academics and careers in new ways. So Tennessee just funded some academic/career coaches and feel very, emphatically that it's a both and, rather than they're not just career coaches, they're not just academic coaches, they're not just helping kids get to college, they're helping them plan their futures. And so I love that the state is rethinking and reshifting how it does business at the state level and within education agencies, and translating that into similar mirrored practice on the ground. So that's been an exciting ally.
Well, I think an interesting challenge or tension, the business community is sort of an interesting one, right? Where you sort of think of this, I think people, right, or policymakers or reform, think of the business community as a sort of, lump group that they will go this way, they'll go that way. And I think you see, Texas is a great example on how the last legislative session went down, where you have some business leaders saying, we really believe in the 4x4. We think this needs to be the default. We believe in career tech, but it needs to have this foundation. And then you have a set of business leaders, employers saying, I just need someone who has a high school diploma. Give it to me now. Get them through high school. Get them to me. And so there's sort of these two tensions of who's right, who's wrong, and it's not a right or wrong. I mean, there are many different employers, many different levels of, what the job preparation looks like. And so that's a challenge, though, to how do you sort of, I don't have an answer to it, right? But that's sort of a surprise, right, as you're working through this, because you think, well, business will absolutely support this, but not necessarily.
Well, please join me in thanking the panel.
Thank you.
And I, in turn, want to thank you for taking time out of your busy days to come join us on this very important topic. I have a feeling that they might have a couple minutes if you want to come up and speak individually, but we very much appreciate your attention and your passion for this topic. Thank you.